the early 2000s really were the best time to be a video game enthusiast. Why? Because the graphics were getting better and better all the time, and the games were getting more and more complex, and the stories were getting more and more mature. Sadly, all of this came to a screeching halt with the release of COD 4, where stories got more and more basic, and gameplay became like that of the old FMV games on the Sega CD. Now today, we're taking a look at a game that did not fear to tread new ground, a game that did not fear to actually be different from the norm. Today, we're taking a look at Max Payne. So now, let's take a look at a bit of its developmental history.
Max Payne was developed by Remedy Entertainment and published by The Gathering of Developers and distributed by Take-Two Interactive and 3D Realms. Also, one of the producers of Max Payne was George Broussard of Duke Nukem fame. The game's genesis began in 1996 as Remedy began developing an idea of a third-person action game. They were inspired by the smash hit that was Tomb Raider, and according to Wikipedia at least, they were determined to avoid its horrid camera system. The game's story and scriptwriter, Sam Lake, mentions that his starting point for the development of the story for Max Payne was the concept of the detective story, and he believed that it would be a good background for a deeper and more psychological story. The game had the initial names of Dark Justice and Max Heat. Both names would later be seen in Max Payne 2. A game prototype would be shown to 3D Realms, and this prototype impressed them enough to sign a development deal, and then production proper began. Remedy Entertainment was a Finnish developer, and so they traveled to New York City to do some research. The article mentions that they were accompanied by 2 ex-NYPD bodyguards.
Really, it's great that New York City has such restrictive gun laws. That way only criminals and cops can have them. If you want to be safe, you just have to hire some bodyguards, thus creating more jobs.
They would get ideas for the various environments of Max Payne, and they would take thousands of photographs for mapping purposes. The developers chose to go with comic panels for cutscenes, which made for a very unique style of storytelling that worked far better than the standard style of cutscene. It was determined that this style would also engage the player on an intellectual level. Max Payne uses its own game engine created by Remedy called the Max FX engine, and it began development in early 1997. This engine would only be used for Max Payne 1 and 2, but like all good games from the early 2000s, there would be a level editor released, and the Max Payne engine would also be licensed to FutureMark, and they would use it in their 3D Mark Benchmark series. The first trailer for the game would be shown at E3 1998, and was a big hit due to its technical advancements, such as muzzle flashes and smoke effects. The game was initially supposed to be released in 1999, but was delayed and heavily modified in the year 2000. The most notable changes were the improvement of the graphics and texture work and lighting, and the multiplayer mode was excised. And the game would finally be released to massive fanfare on July 23rd, 2001.
Now, when Max Payne was released, I had no idea that it even existed. Remember, back in those days, I didn't really follow gaming news all that much. And I didn't even know that Half-Life was even a thing until years later. Max Payne was discovered not by reading about it on the internet or having someone tell me about it, but rather I found Max Payne, the Xbox version, at a local Target. And well, it looked good enough, and I had a little bit of money, so I picked it up. And I did indeed hype myself a bit for the game by reading the instruction manual on the way home from that Target. And well, I was not disappointed in the slightest when I finally was able to play it. Now today we are of course taking a look at the definitive version of Max Payne, which of course is the PC version. So with that, let's enter the world of Max Payne.
Max Payne is a classic-style third-person shooter. Unlike today, where the camera is over the shoulder, Max Payne has the camera directly behind the player. This would be the common camera placement for the third-person shooter genre until the over-the-shoulder camera that would be seen in Resident Evil 4. This game is also classic in regards to weapons in that you are not limited to a mere 2. Rather, you get to carry an entire bloody arsenal of awesome weapons. The game also has partially regenerating health. To fully heal up, you need to pop painkillers like they were bloody Pez. But in a single bit of mercy, the game lets you heal a little bit if you take too much damage. This is important due to several reasons. 1, the game is balls to the wall hard, and 2, when you take too much damage, you will eventually start limping around. And while this is cool and all, it makes an already hard game that much harder. The game itself is definitely classic in terms of difficulty. as the enemies all do a considerable amount of damage and can take a massive amount of damage at times as well. And you really need to know what weapons to use and at what times. Sure, the shotty is powerful, but it must be pumped after each shot, so it is not all that useful for taking on numerous enemies, and if you use it at the wrong time, you will die very quickly. Thankfully, as a true PC game, you can quick save whenever you bloody well want, and by the great Space Dragon does the quick save make this game that much more playable. However, for my rig at least, this is one of those games where it takes forever to bloody well quick save.
On the subject of slowness, one of the major selling points for Max Payne was the ability to enter bullet time. And in the original Xbox manual, they left this ability somewhat ambiguous, thus enhancing its mystique that much more.
Really, bullet time is not all that unrealistic. In times of high stress, certain individuals have been known to be able to speed up their mental processes and thus perceive the world around them as going slower than normal. Bullet time may be cliched now, but back when Max Payne came out, it was the latest thing, and the game itself was in development before the release of The Matrix.
Whoa! Now, while I don't know Kung Fu, and, well, neither does Max Payne, but we both know the greatest martial art of all time, Kachuk!
Bullet time is very helpful in shooting it out with large groups of enemies, and bullet time can be used in a number of different ways. You can just stand still and toggle it, or by hitting the right mouse button and a direction, you can dive in slow-mo, and that is pretty much required if you want to actually make it anywhere in the game. The bullet time meter does fill up over time, so you really don't have to be stingy with it. Now, like any good classic game, there is a huge degree of interactivity, and like any good classic game, there are numerous secret areas to find, and you can also activate various objects just for fun. And there are cool details to be found, like TV programs.
My love, why?
My lord, it is too dreadful. Do not force me to speak the words.
My lady, I beg of you, I must know. I would rather die than not know.
Yes, my lord, we should both be dead, for this shame is too great for the living. My lord, I am your long-lost sister.
And there are several episodes of this TV show to be found throughout the game. And this, of course, is an example of how classic games can in many respects be superior to their modern counterparts. The average modern game is more akin to an interactive movie, whereas many classic games exhibit such standout elements as this, that keep players coming back for years upon years to come. The game of Max Payne is, of course, very story-based, and as such, many of your objectives will be fairly simple. But unlike with modern games, Max Payne does not hold your hand, and you actually have to use some problem solving here and there. For example, you need to shoot this tank and blow open a hole in a wall. If you stand in front of it like an idiot, you will die. Thinking in a video game. Whatever next? Graphically, the game has aged a bit. The faces are the hardest hit by advancing graphics technology. The eyes don't move, nor do the mouths. And they are just static images, but the character models themselves look pretty damn good, and the level textures have aged gracefully. Really, what still holds up graphically after all this time is the advanced level architecture. The levels are very complex and fun to fight through, and they never get boring. And there are some instances where level navigation can require some thought as well. For example, early in the game, you come to this dead end. By modern game logic, you just keep pushing forward, right? Wrong! You actually have to go back to an earlier part of the level and find a newly opened door.
That particular dead end is another one of my gaming memories. I remember back with the original Xbox version wandering around for like 20 minutes, getting extremely frustrated and just shutting the bloody game off for a couple days, then finally coming back to it, only to find that I had to go back where I came, and that there was a door already open. This is not an example of bad level design, but it's definitely an example of memorable level design.
In the game, you have access to a large number of awesome weapons. The Beretta 92, while for Duke it might be a pussy pistol, for the rest of us it will just have to do. You can dual-wield it for extra firepower, and when it is dual-wielded, it is good for taking out numerous enemies. And its ammo is plentiful. The Desert Eagle is another common weapon, and it is useful as well as it has considerable stopping power. You then have the double-barreled super shotgun. That is not all that useful, as it has a rather long reload time. The pump-action shotgun has great stopping power, but it is somewhat slow to fire, and thus is not ideal for taking out large numbers of enemies. The Ingals, dual-wielded or otherwise, are superior to the dual Berettas in terms of crowd control, but they run through ammo like it was bloody water, so keep that in mind when using them. You then have 2 grenade weapons, some frags, and Molotov cocktails. They work well enough in certain areas, but I never found myself really using them all that much. The enemies for the game are as you would expect, gang members that shout whack 'em with wild abandon, and while they might not be multicolored snarly monsters, they're still as dangerous as a bloody cyberdemon, since Max Payne is just a simple human with a penchant for monologuing. As for sound design, it is excellent, with the various voice actors turning in a great performance that actually approach cinematic levels. The guns all sound quite realistic and add an air of authenticity to the game, and the music is also fitting as well and has a very mournful sound to it.
And now on to the absolutely amazing story.
My Beretta stirred nervously under my coat, but the train doors had already shut behind me, and I was in for the ride. Next stop, Roscoe Street Station.
The story for Max Payne is an amazing combination of detective novel, noir film, and comic book. Max Payne himself narrates constantly about what is going on, and his voice actor really sells the performance and makes the game that much more memorable, and the gameplay that much more satisfying.
The security panel let out a mocking cackle. I'd need the right code.
The world Max Payne inhabits is similar to the world that the Punisher from the Punisher Max series inhabits. It's a crime-ridden version of New York City that is run by criminals for criminals, and the police are almost helpless. Max Payne himself is an interesting character as well. He is not your traditional anti-hero, rather he skirts the line between anti-hero and regular hero. The regular hero would work within the system to take down the criminals, but in Max Payne we see that the system is ill-equipped to do much more than break even at times. So Max Payne decides to fight them on his own terms.
Really, the game's story is extremely dark, but unlike with many modern games, it never reaches edgy levels of edginess.
The game starts up with Max Payne coming home to his wife and child, only to find them murdered by junkies that are hopped up on the fictional drug Valkyr. One of the major problems facing the world of Max Payne is addiction to this drug. There was resonance in real life back in 2001, and there is still resonance today in 2016, as meth addiction and heroin addiction continue to get worse and worse. Now, through a series of unfortunate events, he loses more people allied to him, and eventually he just stops caring about the system and begins fighting for revenge, Punisher style. And well, in the course of the game, it is rather hard to find fault with that concept, as there are times when he has no choice but to fight. As mentioned earlier, the game is told through comic panel cutscenes, and these work quite well, and would even be cool in modern day games. The comic panels give the player a unique cinematic experience that one just cannot get from watching super amazing pre-rendered cutscenes. The developers chose this style of cutscene to get the player thinking, and by the great Talos have they succeeded. I got more invested in this game's story than I expected to back in the day, because it was told in such a unique way. The game also gives you control of Max Payne when it is time to actually do something, instead of just having it all play out in a cutscene, or potentially a QTE.
Now, as you all know, I'm not necessarily against QTEs. At times, they can indeed work, and for certain types of boss fights, they work quite well. But after playing Max Payne, I'm starting to reevaluate that particular opinion.
To me, a QTE should be used when you need the player character to do something that could not be carried out in normal gameplay, and this makes sense. And there are several great QTE boss fights out there, most notably in Turok 2008. But then I realized something. Why can't you just have the fight take place within the constraints of normal gameplay? In Max Payne, when you actually reach a boss fight or a story segment where you have to kill a major enemy, the game lets you play the game. For example,
I got something for the boss. Lupino around?
That kind of depends on who's asking. A friend or a junk squad plan. But don't answer. It's one of them, how do you put it, rhetorical questions. Lupino ain't here, but he said bye. I am
mind, and it made me start thinking that, well, maybe other games should just shut up and let you play the bloody game.
And this happens all throughout the game. It is much more satisfying for it. There are so many little elements in the story that you know that this game, like Resident Evil and Doom and so many other legendary games, was a labor of love. There are ties and references to Norse mythology all throughout, but you never get hit over the head with them, and you actually have to play the game to figure out what it all means.
As you would expect, Max Payne was extraordinarily popular and extraordinarily successful. So successful that it actually garnered 2 sequels, Max Payne 2 in 2003 and Max Payne 3 way in 2012. Both sequels were pretty bloody good and both stayed true to what Max Payne was supposed to be. Max Payne would also get a film, and that film was decent. You gotta remember, video game movies are seldom good, and Max Payne, while not good, at least wasn't as terrible as that bloody Doom film. Now I highly recommend checking out Max Payne. It is a classic in every sense of the word, and is definitely competitive against many modern games today. So, this is GeneralLotz wishing you good Max Payne 2 and good Max Payne 3, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed my review of Max Payne, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue to bring you these great reviews.